The 6th century was a turbulent metamorphosis. The rigid institutions of the classical Roman world evolved into the heavily fortified structures of the Middle Ages. At the center of this transition sat Justinian I. Backed by the immense wealth of the Eastern Roman Empire, he fixed his gaze on the West, driven by a fixation on stitching the fractured Mediterranean back together. Justinian rose from a peasant family in the Balkan village of Taurasium, far from the patrician bloodlines of Old Rome. He climbed the ranks of the military bureaucracy through the influence of his uncle, an ascent that deeply unsettled the established Byzantine nobility. He compounded that elite resentment when he chose his empress. Theodora was the daughter of a hippodrome bearkeeper and a former actress, a profession strictly barred from marrying senatorial ranks. To legitimize their union, Justinian dismantled centuries of Roman legal precedent. By the year 532, the capital was a powder keg. A series of earthquakes and severe droughts and mounting political anger culminated in the Nika Riot. What began as a dispute between racing factions exploded into a rebellion that set Constantinople aflame. As the city burned and rebel factions crowned a new emperor, Justinian prepared a fleet to flee. Theodora blocked his retreat, citing her belief that the royal purple makes a fine burial shroud. Her refusal to run forced Justinian to stand his ground. He ordered his generals Belisarius and Mundus to march their mercenaries into the hippodrome. They sealed the exits and slaughtered an estimated 30,000 citizens trapped inside. With the organized domestic opposition eradicated in a single afternoon, the smoking ruins of the capital offered Justinian a blank slate. He now held the unchecked authority required to execute his grand vision. Justinian pursued domestic homogenization. He sought to govern every surviving subject under a single, streamlined legal code and a single religious truth. He commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis, a reorganization of centuries of contradictory Roman legislation. This new code stripped the Senate of its remaining legislative power, codifying a new reality. The emperor's will was now the ultimate source of law. Simultaneously, he positioned himself as the protector of the Chalcedonian Creed. He ended the Acacian Schism, reconciling with the Roman papacy, while authorizing violent purges and property confiscations against Arian and Samaritan minorities. Yet the crown maintained a calculated release valve. While Justinian aggressively enforced orthodoxy, Theodora maintained ties with the dissenters, going so far as to secretly house persecuted Monophysite monks within the Great Palace itself. This centralized authority demanded a physical manifestation in the rebuilt capital. Justinian hired 2 mathematicians, Anthemius and Isidorus, to engineer the Hagia Sophia. Their use of a massive dome resting on pententages was designed as a cosmic mirror. The structure captured so much sunlight it appeared to generate its own radiance from within, providing a tangible symbol of divine grace and imperial legitimacy. With the East consolidated, Justinian weaponized his religious seal. He framed his Western military expeditions as a moral crusade to liberate fellow Romans from the rule of Arian usurpers. This map shows the empire prior to 534. The Vandalic War in North Africa restored maritime hegemony, but the Italy campaign, visible in the hatched zones, began at Lilybam and devolved into 20 years of grinding attrition under Belisarius and Narses. The symbolic necessity of reclaiming the city of Rome slowly cannibalized the empire's eastern reserves. Sicilian estates that once produced 50,000 modi of wheat annually for the church were drained to feed a state locked in perpetual warfare. Then, in the year 542, at the peak of Justinian's territorial expansion, an outbreak of bubonic plague struck the empire. This chart illustrates the devastating intersection of demographics and military costs. Roughly 250,000 people died in Constantinople alone. This demographic plunge instantly shattered the empire's tax base, leaving its borders dangerously undefended. This sudden vulnerability opened the door for a Gothic revival in Italy. Under the leadership of King Totila, the Goths successfully offered the local population a more humane alternative to the heavy-handed Byzantine occupation. To fund the continuing war, imperial officials resorted to extreme fiscal cruelty. Administrators like Alexander, nicknamed Scissors, obsessively clipped the edges of gold solidus coins like this one to squeeze out extra revenue. His aggressive tax extraction actively subverted military loyalty, pushing underpaid Byzantine soldiers to desert to the Gothic side. Justinian died in 565 at the age of 82. He left behind a childless throne and an overextended, exhausted state. Just 3 years after his death, the Lombards forcefully invaded Italy, rapidly undoing decades of costly Western labor. Despite the rapid collapse of his Western conquests, the Byzantines maintained a tenuous, heavily fortified foothold in Italy, known as the Exarchate of Ravenna. Justinian's 20-year war and the subsequent plague left the Italian peninsula depopulated and its urban society in ruins. The physical unity of the Roman world was permanently broken. Yet the Corpus Juris Civilis provided the legal architecture for modern Europe, and his monumental masterpiece, the Hagia Sophia, still stands. The empire he sought to restore was ultimately lost, but the blueprints he drafted survived.